Let's talk about a couple of these ACC games coming up this weekend. Man, everybody loves the ACC. Shout out to the ACC. Two really good games, in all seriousness, coming up in the ACC this weekend. And then a third game I want to talk about, too, just because it's a little interesting to me. But in the afternoon, 3:30, I think it is, we've got Wake Forest traveling down to take on Florida State, ranked versus ranked game here. Both of these teams ranked in the 20s, depending on which poll you look at. Florida State, of course, undefeated. Surprisingly so, I think. I don't think very many people had Florida State starting 4-0. Most people had Florida State losing their second game, which was a week 1 game because they played in week 0 at LSU. But they won that one. You know, Florida State's 4-0. Beat Boston College last week bad, 44-14 or something like that, 44-13, somewhere in there. And then, of course, Wake Forest was undefeated until this past weekend. They lost in overtime at home to Clemson in a great game. So this will be a good one here. Can Florida State stay undefeated? First time Florida State is 4-0 since, 2015 or 16, something like that. Can they go to 5-0? Well, they can. I mean, Wake Forest is not unbeatable. We saw that last week when they lost to Clemson. Can Florida State offensively keep up with Wake Forest? We'll see. Wake Forest scored a lot of points on Clemson, which was a little bit surprising. I'm going to talk more about Clemson in a minute, but Clemson's defense, at least through the first month of the season, has not lived up to the offseason hype. Florida State, it seems like, has had some of like every type of game. They've had the blowout they just had against Boston College. They've had an upset, if you want to call it that. I mean, it was an upset at the time when they beat LSU. And they've had a close game where they had to come from behind on the road at Louisville. What type of Florida State game will we see this week? It's a good question. Weather, I don't think, will be much of a factor in this game. Florida's getting absolutely hammered right now by that hurricane. But by the time this game is played on Saturday, most of the bad weather should be gone from the entire state of Florida. And Tallahassee is not really in the direct line of the hurricane. I'm sure they're going to get a bunch of rain and stuff today and some wind maybe today and tomorrow. But I'm assuming, at least right now when I'm making the pick for this game, that I don't think weather's going to be that much of a factor, which I think is good if you're pulling for Wake Forest. You know, a team that throws the ball around like Wake Forest does. Sam Hartman's an amazing quarterback, 6 touchdown passes last week against the Taters. Not easy to do if it's really, really windy and wet. So it doesn't look like that's going to be an issue. So I'm operating under that premise right now anyway. But, man, a touchdown favorite in this game at home for Florida State over Wake Forest. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see it. I do think Florida State's a good team. Obviously a better team at this point in the year, like I mentioned, than just about anybody thought they were going to be. But I don't think Florida State is some kind of elite level team. I don't think they're a top 10 team. They are definitely headed in the right direction. Their patience with Mike Norvell has paid off. Maybe some other programs around the country might need to take note of that. It seems like these coaches are getting fired 2 and 3 years in. Sometimes they deserve it, but didn't start off great for Mike Norvell, but so far this year, so far so good for Florida State. And I still think Wake Forest is a pretty good team because I think Clemson is a pretty good team. I think Clemson's a legitimate top 10 team. Wake Forest went blow to blow with them there, losing by 1 score in overtime. I don't think Florida State is on Clemson's level. Now, they are at home, Florida State, and you've got to worry about kind of Wake Forest showing up flat after a huge emotional overtime loss at home the week before to a top 10, top 5 Clemson team. Does Wake Forest have some type of hangover? You know, a team can beat you twice. We see it all the time. A team can beat you twice. If you're Wake Forest, don't let Clemson beat you twice. They beat you last week. Don't let them beat you again this week on the road at Florida State. I'm going to take Wake Forest in the points in this one. I'm surprised Florida State's a 7-point favorite. I know they blew out Boston College. Boston College is absolutely horrendous. They probably got the worst offensive line in the Power 5. They played Duquesne in week 0, which is a nobody. The 2 best teams they've played, LSU and Louisville, are games really that could have gone either way. Florida State won both of them, and they're 2-0. Florida State could almost just as easily have lost both of those games. Florida State was losing the majority of the game to Louisville, come back and won at the end, which, congratulations, finding a way to win instead of finding a way to lose is a positive trait to have. I just find it hard to believe that even at home, Florida State can beat this Wake Forest team by a touchdown or more. They could definitely win the game, but I'm going to bank on this one being close if they do win it. And honestly, if Wake Forest and Sam Hartman get hot, I mean, if Wake Forest offense played like it played last week, it's hard for me to imagine Florida State winning this game. So I'm going to take Wake Forest in that one and the points. NC State and Clemson, one of the biggest games of the week in all of college football, not just within the ACC, but Clemson, of course, is top 5 in most people's rankings. NC State, top 10-ish in most people's rankings, 9 in some, 10 in some, 11 or 12 in some, depending on who's ranking or poll or whatever you're looking at. Two pretty good teams. Clemson has been surprising to me this year. Some good and some bad. Clemson offensively has played better than I thought they would play this year, and their quarterback DJ Uiagalelei, our buddy the ukulele, he had the game of his life this past weekend against Wake Forest, and Clemson needed it. Clemson needed every one of those yards and touchdowns and plays that the ukulele made this past week to come out on top on the road at Wake Forest. So that's been surprising to me in a good way. I did expect Clemson's offense to be better. I still had a lot of questions, though. And I still have some questions offensively about Clemson. Clemson's offense, although better than last year, don't get it twisted. This is not the Clemson offense that we saw under Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, whatever quarterbacks you want to name over the past 6-7 years. This is not that offense. Will Shipley, the running back, is really, really good. They don't have the wide receiver core that they're used to having, and as good as the ukulele played this last week, he's still not the quarterback that Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson was. So, although Clemson's offense is much improved over what we saw last year, which really, they couldn't have been much worse, I still don't think Clemson offensively is at the level where they were when they were winning national titles. Not to say they can't win one this year. I'm just comparing their offense today to kind of what we're used to seeing under the last 6 or 7 years. Defensively for Clemson, I'm also surprised, and not in a good way. Clemson's defense was one of the most talked about and hyped up during the offseason. There was a lot of talk about Clemson having maybe the best defense in all of college football and almost certainly the best front seven in all of college football. Now, they've had some injuries. They've had some guys miss some games. I get that. So has everyone else, though. Okay? This idea that we're injured and no one else is, and I haven't heard any Clemson fans say that. So I'm not here to bark at Clemson fans. But in case someone wants to say that in the comments, so look, you're a month into the season. There's no such thing as a healthy team right now. There's not. Georgia's had players miss games. Everybody's had players miss games. We're a month into the season. So, you're going to say, well, we were missing guys from the secondary last week against Wake Forest. Okay, great. Well, what about your NFL front seven that's supposed to have 100 sacks this year? Anyway, the defense has been disappointed. There's no other way around it. Clemson's 4 opponents this year. Georgia Tech, Louisiana Tech, Furman, and Wake Forest. That's one team with a pulse, and that's Wake Forest. Those other 3 teams are absolute garbage. Absolute garbage, and they ain't got no business competing with Clemson. Clemson is 73rd in scoring defense. 73rd. That's not great. That's not good. That's not even bad. That's horrible. That's horrible. The 73rd in scoring defense a month into the season. This isn't after one fluke game. 4 months, 33%, 4 games. 1 month, 4 games, 1 month, 33% of the way through the regular season. 73rd in scoring defense. Not good. NC State, on the other hand, again, a team that was talked about a lot in the offseason as being possibly the best NC State team we've seen in a while coming up this year, right? And they've played pretty well. I mean, they're undefeated. A weird week 1 game that, maybe they could have lost. I think they, what did they beat? They beat Texas Tech. Is that right? Same Texas Tech team that beat Texas? Anyway, NC State on the road at Clemson. Clemson has not lost a home game in like 6 years. It's been a long time since Clemson's lost a home game. And NC State has not had much success under Dave Duran against Clemson either. But this is a 6.5 point or 7 point spread, depending on where you look, at least at the time that I'm recording this video, which is Wednesday afternoon. This just seems like a lot of points to me. I think NC State's a better team than Wake Forest. The Wake Forest-Clemson game went to overtime. I know that was on the road at Wake Forest. This one's home against Clemson. I think I hate to say this because the ukulele did play good last week. I don't know if I'm a Clemson fan. I don't know that I'm to the point where I'm willing to count on getting that every single week, though. I think NC State's got a significant chance at covering the spread in this game and a possibility of winning outright. If the Clemson defense can't get right, this could be the game where, believe it or not, that's what ends up costing them. If the offense doesn't play at the elite level it played last week against Wake, which Wake's got one of the worst defenses in the ACC, let's just call it what it is. As good as Wake is, as good as their record was last year, as good as their record is this year, as fun as it is to watch Sam Hartman run that offense, and as good as they are offensively, they're absolutely horrible on defense. I mean, you go back to last year's Clemson-Wake Forest game. Wake Forest was scored 50 points a game last year. They played Clemson, they scored 20. Well, this year they scored 45 or 48 or what. I mean, it was just a track meet game. And, okay, NC State doesn't have quite the offense that Wake Forest does, but their defense is infinitely better. In other words, even if DJ Uiagalelei plays as good against Wake Forest as he played against, as good against NC State as he played against Wake Forest, the numbers aren't going to be the same, I don't think, because the Wake Forest defense is just better. You can play good and the numbers not reflect that if the defense is just really, really good or a lot better than what the numbers were from last week against Wake Forest. And Clemson defensively, man, has really been a worry. Now, I don't know how many of their defensive backs, a couple of their defensive backs were out last week against Wake Forest. They're getting a couple of those back this week. But heading into the game last week against Wake Forest, we knew those guys were going to be out. And what the Clemson fan told you was, yeah, but we're getting the people back in our front seven that have been out. That will neutralize the weakness in the back end. Well, it didn't. It didn't. Wake Forest lit up that Clemson defense that we were told all offseason was going to be one of the best in the country. Clemson defense clearly not one of the best in the country. Whether it's because of injuries or because of some other reason is irrelevant to this conversation. The point is the Clemson defense at this point in the season is not what we thought it would be. I'm going to take NC State and the points. Wow, that's 2 games so far. I'm taking the underdog, or at least the points. I wouldn't be shocked if Florida State beats Wake Forest, but I'm taking Wake Forest in the points. I'm also going to take NC State in the points against Clemson. And again, it won't shock me if Clemson wins. But for those of you that don't care about points or whatever, I actually think NC State's got a pretty good chance to win this game. I don't know that I would bet that outright. In other words, I don't know that I'd bet the money line for NC State to win, but I would definitely take NC State into 6.5 points. That game comes on at 7 or 7:30. The Wake Forest Florida State game 3:30. NC State Clemson 7:30, I believe, 7 or 7:30. I think it's 7:30. And then at 8 o'clock, Pitt hosts Georgia Tech, who finally fired Jeff Collins this week, a year and a half or 8 months too late. They should have fired him at the end of last year. I'm not going to get into that. I've made enough videos about that. A team can go one or two ways when their coach is fired. They can do the whole rally the troops, circle the wagon, win one for the Gipper deal, or they can just completely throw in the towel. The problem is with Georgia Tech, even if they choose option A, kind of rally the troops and circle the wagon deal, they don't have any talent. That's one of the problems there. That's one of the reasons Jeff Collins is out of a job and no talent, plus he's just not a very good coach. I think Pitt wins the game for sure. No, I give Georgia Tech a 0% chance of winning the game on the road at Pitt. Pitt's a top 25 team, or at least they're currently ranked in the top 25. They do have the one loss, but I don't. Does anybody think Georgia Tech's got a chance to win that game post Jeff Collins? I don't care who they. I know about the guy they've made interim head coach, but they say the same things every time. Oh, the kids love him, the players love him. This is great. They're going to play hard for him. Okay, great. It's not going to be enough. I think Pitt wins. The spread is 21.5. Man, that is a high spread. I'm not going to bet the game. There's no way I'll bet this game. But for picking purposes on video, hell, give me Pitt, lay the 21.5. Georgia Tech's an absolute garbage can. I'll do a couple of more of these prediction videos. We'll definitely do an SEC one. There's some good games in the Big 12 this week, too. Baylor and Oklahoma State play, rematch of the Big 12 title game from last year. Anyway, so this is the first of a series of prediction videos I'll do for this weekend's game. So there you go, some ACC games. Have a good morning.